0.
Greetings, fellow barbarians. It is I, Alan Odinson, and you are listening to the Barbarian Lounge podcast. Well, thank you guys for joining me today. We've got a really interesting topic today. One of my all-time favorite books. We're going to be discussing the book known as Goren no Sho, or as we like to call it here, the Book of Five Rings, written by Miyamoto Musashi. So this is one of the most popular books written regarding I think on strategy in general. A lot of people like to talk about the Art of War, and the Art of War is a phenomenal book regarding strategy. It's been translated in tons of different languages, and it's read by businessmen and everything. But if you do not know, the Book of Five Rings falls into that same category. Because the Book of Five Rings, while it is a book on combat, while it is a book on the methods of training used by Musashi himself, it is primarily a book on strategy. This is one of the books, I remember when I used to fight, do MMA fights and boxing and stuff like that. When I used to do that back in the day, this was a book that I had a small copy of this book. I was actually looking for that copy this morning, but I've got one of my larger copies here. Yes, I own several copies of the book because different translations sometimes will give you a little different insight. But I used to take this book with me every time I went. And on the way to the event, usually I had somebody driving me. On the way to the event, I would sit and read this book. This helped me to kind of get my mind ready for a strategic fight, because my goal was never to go in there, even though this is the Barbarian Lounge, my goal was never to go in there and just throw hands and swing for the fences. No, I was a very strategically oriented fighter. I worked on dissecting my opponent down and just really breaking it down to its base level, so I would have the ability to overcome and use their weaknesses against them. And as I got older, I realized, I've read this book multiple times, but each and every time I look at it, it almost like it triggers something in your brain that makes you think. And I don't know if that was Musashi's intention when he wrote this book, but it was something that I always found. As I moved on later in life, now my emphasis has shifted away from the sporting combative aspect of things, the sporting thing. You know, I'm past that stage in my life, and now my primary goal is personal protection, protecting my family, protecting my brothers, protecting my folk, different aspects of that. So your mentality shifts, and I know a lot of people don't like to hear that. They don't like to hear that, oh, well, you train MMA, you're ready for it. No, that's not true. We've had my good friend Steve Montgomery, who I just watched in the cage a couple of days ago, thrash his opponent in the first round by ground and pound TKO, which I actually predicted. A lot of people believe that, I'm trained MMA and I train jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. I'm ready for anything. Against an unarmed opponent, just one opponent, you probably are. You probably are going to be way ahead of the curve. However, street altercations don't typically fall into that category. Usually, one of the things when I took the fight, we were talking statistics. That's the fight at Tactical Response. We were talking statistics, and statistically, in most of your attacks on the street, it's 2 or more people. So why is everybody out there training one-on-one? It's the easiest route, right? And it shows us that we can win against one person. You do need to be able to defeat one person before you can have the ability to defeat multiple people. I've always believed that. I've always been a big proponent of, knowing how to fight one person before you could fight two. I think it was Hicks and Gracie used to talk about. They asked him, they said, they're like, well, what are you going to do against multiple people or whatever? And he usually had two responses. One was he would pull out his his Sig 45 and say, "This is my move for multiple opponents," or he would say, "You can't even defeat one person. What makes you think you can defeat two?" So, and I've always believed that. I've always think that is a vital aspect of our training that we have to have. I'm also of the impression, though, I think it was Mark Denny of the Dog Bros. I need to get Guru Mark on here. But he used to say, well, this is the reason we use weapons. Weapons is a force multiplier. It's always been a force multiplier. If you listen to my episode when I talked to last week's episode with Mr. Keating, we talked about, human beings, we are a tool-based animal. Our strength comes in our ability to use tools. You've never seen, whenever we used to kill woolly mammoths, we never killed woolly mammoths with a spinning sidekick or a right cross. That's not the way we killed animals. We had to use a spear, we had to use a knife. Our strength comes in using tools. And Musashi talks about this as well. We see this from Musashi. So, let's get into the heart of the book here a little bit. I've actually got the copy sitting right here in front of me, and I'm going to be going through these different things as I'm doing the show. And we're going to talk about how these methods from many years ago, during the samurai era, Musashi fought many duels to the death, and he was undefeated in all those duels. And this is where he honed his ways of strategy. So we're going to see how these methods of samurai combat actually translate over into modern day. You're going to see how all this stuff comes into play even as we've advanced to the stage of guns. We're not carrying swords anymore. At least I'm not carrying swords. I don't know about you guys, but we're going to talk about how all these things translate over into modern days. For me, instead of carrying a sword on me all the time, I'm carrying a firearm. So in the book Goren no Sho, Musashi breaks it down into, we're going to talk about the scrolls, the 5 elements that Musashi talks about. That's the scroll of the earth, the scroll of water, the scroll of fire, scroll of wind, and the scroll of heaven. So, in these books, you have the scroll of the earth, and the scroll of the earth really talks a lot about Musashi's different ways of strategy and how he became to understand these ways of strategy and how to use them. So let's get into the first one is going to be the Book of Earth. Okay, so with the Book of the Earth, you have the first part. Like I said, this breaks down into a lot of different things. This is mainly what he found in his path of strategy. Musashi fought more than 60 times, undefeated. So, being someone who's put yourself in the situation of combat, life or death combat, you're looking at a guy here who had seen death, he had dealt death, he knew what it took to survive these aspects. And while a lot of samurai had different mentalities as it related to honor, as it related to how you go about doing the fight, Musashi did this differently. He was very different in his way of combat. So the first part he talks about concerning the way of strategy, and he talks about how people just. I'm gonna read this to you here real quick. It says, from China to Japan, over a long time, a person who practices this way has been known as an adept in strategy. For a warrior, it is not possible not to study it. Nowadays, there are certain people to be found everywhere who declare themselves accomplished practitioners of strategy, but in general, they practice only the sword. Recently, the Shinto priest of Kantori and Kashima in the prefecture of Hitachi have founded schools saying that their art was transmitted to them by the gods, and they have propagated their art in various fiefs. Among the 10 talents and the 7 arts that have been long known, strategy is considered to be a pragmatic domain. Since it is a pragmatic domain, it is not appropriate to limit it just to the technique of the sword. On the basis of the principles of the sword alone, you will not be able to understand the sword well, and you will be far from being in accord with the principles of strategy. So, he goes on here. Basically what Musashi is talking about here in the Book of Earth is understanding the not just getting caught up in use of the sword. Like I say, I understand strategy because I practice sword. It's the same way as somebody saying, I understand strategy because, or I understand how to fight because I am a skilled handgun shooter. Well, what do you know about rifles? I have been in many different fields of security, and several of them are armed security. One of them, as I spoke about before, was nuclear security. And we had gentlemen in there who were out of the military. Some of them were fresh out of the military. And, you could hand them an M4. You could hand them an M4 and tell them, break it down, shoot it, everything. And they could do it, man. They tear that thing down. They could put it back together. They could shoot. I mean, everything was great. Hand them a handgun, and you saw a different story. Main reason is because primarily in the military, guys focus more on the rifle than they do the handgun. And I understand that. If it's up to me, if I have the choice of going to a fight of grabbing a rifle or a handgun, I'm obviously going to grab the rifle because of its obvious advantages. However, you have to think to yourself, if you ever found yourself, if any of these guys ever found themselves in a situation where their rifle malfunctioned with the M4, that's absolutely possible. Any machinery will malfunction. A lot of these guys would find themselves in trouble because they do not run that handgun very well. And Musashi talks about comparison of the way of strategy with the way of the carpenter. So, a carpenter, if you think about what a carpenter has to do, a carpenter is very dependent upon their tools. They're dependent upon having their tools. They're dependent upon the mastery of their tools to do their craft. They're also dependent upon the maintenance of those tools. And you see that a lot of times with people in the field of combatives. And that can go for a lot of things. When I say combatives, I'm talking about combatives holistically. You don't want to have this idea that I carry a handgun all the time, so I don't need to learn how to defend against knives. I've talked about this ad nauseum. But you get those guys that, my defense for a knife attack is my gun. It's like, there's a lot of factors in there before you get that gun into play that you have to answer for. But if you understand the use of the blade, you'll understand its limitations, you'll understand how deadly it is, and you'll have the ability to counter against them. So you have an understanding of the tools. I know a lot of people, talking about knives again, I know a lot of people who carry a pocket knife. I mean, if you're listening to this show, you probably have one on your hip right now. And I'll ask these people sometimes, I'll say, how would you use that knife to defend yourself? And they'll just kind of look at you like, I don't know, I didn't really think about it. And it's like, well, why are you even carrying it? Do you ever practice deploying it? Do you practice getting it out of your pocket? Just in general. I'm talking quick, fast, in a hurry. You need to get that blade into play. Do you ever do that? A lot of people don't. A lot of people will carry a pocket knife in their pocket, and they'll go to open it, and you'll hear it going because it's all grunged up with pocket lint. So that is not maintaining your weapon. Although a lot of the firearms that I carry, especially, I've told you guys before, I'm a Glock man. I know some of you guys cringe at the thought of Glock, but hey, there's a reason everybody carries Glocks. It's because they work. So a lot of times you can kind of neglect your Glock a little bit and let it get gummed up and all that, and it'll still work because that's what they do. They work. However, I find it appropriate to at least once a month to break it down and just give it a cleaning. And it's not because I'm concerned about it failing on me or whatever. Obviously, these issues come into play. However, I believe that the maintenance of your tools and the confidence in your ability to upkeep those tools is vital. If you got a knife, keep it sharp. If you got medical skills, carry your shit. Learn how to use it. Know how to use all these things. This is very, very, very important. So we find those. I always love that analogy of the carpenter, because the carpenter, he's very skilled in what he does. He knows how to build a foundation of his skills. All of his skills are based off of this foundation he builds with his tools. He understands his tools fully. And Musashi talks about in the another element. Of course, he compares not just with the carpenter, but it's with the painter and all these things. And all these things are important in the way of strategy for us even today. You need to know your tools. You need to know your tools intimately. You need to keep them maintained. Keep your knife sharp. Keep a round in the chamber. Know what kind of rounds you're carrying. Know the performance of your handgun. If you're carrying a shotgun in your car, a rifle, your shotgun, know how it patterns. Know what ammo patterns which way. Keep your rifle up to maintenance. Know what rounds run the best. All these things, if you have an intimate knowledge of your weapons, it will do you justice if the fight comes to you. And in many cases, it will when you least expect it. Another element that we see here in this Book of Earth is Musashi talks about knowing the advantage of each weapon in strategy. And this is what I was just talking about. He talks about the small sword. The small sword is great for confined places. If you don't know, Musashi employed two swords. That was one of the things that made him different as well. We may talk about that later if time permits. But know each weapon in its strategy. A short sword is good for confined spaces. So obviously, you're not going to use a short sword primarily in a wide open space if your opponent is armed with a large sword. It doesn't do you justice. So, but by understanding the shortcomings of the weapon you have, its advantages and disadvantages, if you find yourself in that situation, such as having a short sword against a long sword, the short sword is good in confined spaces. So what does that mean? The closer you are to your opponent, the more advantage you have and the less advantage he's going to have. And this will translate over into firearms as well. If you're a person who carries a 6-shooter, you carry a revolver as your everyday carry. I wouldn't advise it as a primary, but hey, some people do that. You need to know your advantages. What are your advantages of it? Your malfunctioning ability it goes down. You can employ that weapon very closely because and make contact pressure shots without having to worry about putting it out of battery. You'll have a limitation in rounds, so that means you need to really focus on your accuracy, although I would say focus on your accuracy with any gun. But, you can't afford to spin rounds just downrange either way with either weapon. If you carry, I tell people about this with blades. If you're talking a karambit is a specialty blade. A lot of people like them because they look cool and they got this hook, but it's a specialty blade. I would not say to employ that weapon against a Bowie knife. However, if you understand the value of that weapon, you can employ it in the range that it's used. It's the same way for rifles, shotguns, handguns. Know your weapon. Know where it's going to be best used. In some situations, I found this in the fight as well. In some situations, when the guy's right up on me with a handgun, just going for my gun in that position, that weapon is not appropriate. Yes, he has a gun, I have a gun, but I have to get it out and get it into play. He's already got his gun on me and finger on the trigger. So what is the best weapon to use there? Well, it's obviously the weapon I can get out the quickest. In many situations, that weapon was my hands. Getting control and taking that gun out of the equation, whether it's disarming it, moving it to a safe position so I can get another weapon into play, that was the way to go. And it's not because that my hands are superior to my handgun or knife or whatever it may be. It's just because that was not the appropriate weapon for the job. So Musashi talks about this as well, and he found this in his way of strategy. He talks about bows. He talks about firearms because beginner firearms, black powder guns, were used towards the end of the samurai era. Long swords, short swords. There's all manner of weapons that he ran into, so he understood these things as well. He understood using cadence. He talks about cadence here. Cadence in strategy. Cadence is inherent in all things, especially as far as strategy is concerned. It is not possible to master cadence without thorough training. In this world, we can see that different cadences exist. The cadence of the way of the dance and of musicians with their stringed and wind instruments are all concordant and without distortion. Going through the various ways of the martial arts, there are different cadences depending on whether you are shooting a bow, firing a gun, or riding a horse. You must not go against cadence in any of the arts, nor in any handcraft. Cadence also exists for that which does not have a visible form. So he talks about this cadence, and the cadence is really just kind of a rhythm of the fight, learning to control the rhythm of the fight. He says here, in strategy, different cadences exist. First, it is necessary to know the concordant cadences, and then to learn the discordant ones. Among the large and small, and the slow and fast cadences, it is indispensable for strategy to discern striking cadences, interval cadences, and opposing cadences. Your strategy cannot be sure if you do not succeed in mastering the opposing cadence. At the time of strategic combat, you must know the cadences of each enemy and utilize cadences that they will not think of. You will win by unleashing the cadence of emptiness that are born from those of wisdom. In each scroll I will write about cadence. Examine these writings and train well. So Musashi talked a lot about this rhythm of the fight and being able to change it. And if you've ever done any martial arts, you'll know the concept of cadence. If you don't, there's something severely lacking there. But basically, different guys will fight in different cadences. I think about, let's say for instance, let's take a guy like, I'll compare to, if you don't know these fighters, I'm sorry for you, but we're going to talk MMA for a second. You talk about a guy like Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva is known for extreme violence. He's known for coming out and throwing hands and just overwhelming you with extreme violence. If he gets you on the ground, he's going to cockroach stomp you into the mat. And that was Wanderlei's style. Comes straight forward, bang, 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 just unleashes hell upon you with his fists, knees, elbows. In the old days, his head. He would headbutt you, stomp you. All these different things he was known for. That is I would consider that a fast cadence. If you take a guy like, let's say, a Lyoto Machida. Lyoto Machida being a karate fighter, he's a very strategic type fighter. A lot of people give him shit about running, but I say these people don't understand strategy. Lyoto does not fight this way. Lyoto hangs back. He uses a slower counterpuncher style cadence. So against somebody like a Wanderlei Silva, Lyoto would look to counter as Wanderlei come in swinging fist. Lyoto would look to take a step back and fire a punch down the middle and get off line. So that's a different style of cadence. You see the same thing in gunfights. Gunfights, you have those guys who their strategy of the gunfight is to whip the gun out and just start blazing rounds down range. A lot of people will do this under stress. But then you have those guys who practice, lining up on the front sight, sighting in on the front sight focus, trigger press to the rear, boom, putting that round where it needs to go. Different cadences in that. You find it in blade work as well. You'll see it in fencing. If you listen to my episode with James Keating, we talked about fencing a lot. You'll see these guys who use a slow pace cadence, and then you'll see a guy come in with a fast pace. So a lot of times when your opponent starts expecting this sort of fight, imagine somebody like Wanderlei Silva going against Lyoto Machida, and all of a sudden Machida decides to blitz him. Or Wanderlei decides to hang back and counterpunch Machida. Completely unexpected, and your opponent has to adapt to that. As we've talked about before, in SIOC, they have the term of being the feeder, and that is basically controlling the action, controlling the moves of the other person. Even if you were the person who were being attacked, you flip the bill on them and make them have to feed and react to what you are doing. And this is the idea of controlling cadence. If you have the ability to control the cadence, you can control the pace of the fight. Whether it's a gunfight, it may be you starting the fight off with extreme violence. A lot of times you'll see, in cases of suppressive fire, you'll see guys unleash hell, and just suppress them, and they may use that suppression as they're getting to a cover location. If it's just you, if you got a team or whatever, but we're talking just single gunfight. Boom, boom, you start putting rounds their way to get to cover. Then you can slow the pace down and start picking your shots a little better. So there's a lot of different strategies that can be employed, that can be used, and Musashi talks about these as well. That Book of Earth really starts setting the foundation for Musashi's way of thinking. His way of thinking was a very holistic approach, was to look at training in everything, to look at the way the painter operates and how the painter does this. And it's like, okay, so that really translates over into what I do. He takes care of his brushes. He doesn't let the paint get gunked up in there because his brush is going to be useless to him the next time he uses it. It's the same way with your gun. You don't want that. You don't want to put too much oil in there and get your slide gunked up. It starts collecting all this trash that you keep and everything like that. He maintains his holster. He has a good belt. You have a good carry system for your weapons. You don't just throw it on there or stick it in your pants like you're some kind of hood rat in Baltimore or something. That's not your game plan. You pay attention to your tools. You take care of your tools. You keep your knives sharp. You keep your medical gear functioning. You make sure it's on you every time. It's the same for the archer. I talk to my archers all the time. I said, maintain your equipment. They say, should I keep my bow strung? Should I keep it strung? Well, with Odinson archery bows, you don't necessarily have to unstring it every time, but I tell them, if you want to maintain your weapon for a long period of time, I highly advise you to unstring it so it will not set in. Some people do this, some people don't, but that's their call. So always be sure to maintain your weapons. Know your weapons. Know each and every tool in your toolbox. Know the capabilities of your hands. Know that I have guys come out for combative training, and I tell them to hit the dummy. And the dummy I have set up, it has a hard skull. So I tell them, I say, look, the rules for striking is open hand to the head and closed fist to the body. And I put them under stress, and I tell them to hit the dummy. And what do? They ball their fist up, and they start punching the dummy. And after about 2 10-second rounds of that, their hands are all swole up, and they can't hardly make a fist anymore. And I say, this is why we say to do open hand to the head. Because if you can't work your hands anymore, how are you going to deploy another weapon into the fight if need be? So... And that is understanding the limitations of your weapons. The limitations of your hands are the fact that they are brittle bones. They can break easily. If you open hand, hey, guess what? You can do that pretty much all day long. Palm heels. These things were around for a reason. These things, you think about when these things were used. These things were used in times when guys wore armor. So, yes, that's the reason you're using open palm to the head. So... in the Scroll of Water, he starts talking about different aspects of the mind of strategy in his school of two swords, being that of like water. Now, in some of these different things where he talks primarily about sword, I'm going to kind of skip over those just because some of those will not directly apply. Those that do apply, I will discuss them. The first thing he talks about here in the Scroll of the Water is he talks about the way of strategy is the state of mind in strategy. And it says in this first paragraph, in the way of strategy, one's state of mind need not be distinct from the ordinary one. In daily life, as well as in strategy, it is necessary to have an ample and broad mind and to carefully keep it very straight, not too tight, and not at all loose. In order not to have your mind too much off to one side, it is necessary to place it in the center and move it calmly so that it does not cease to move even in moments of change. All that has to be examined well. So Musashi talks a lot about mindset here. Well, that's what he's talking about. He's talking about mindset. And if you know anything about concepts behind fighting in general, whether it be gunfighting, knife fighting, fighting with your fist, grappling, whatever it may be, you know that mindset is above all things. Mindset, tactics, gear, mindset is at the top of all these things. A lot of guys get too caught up in gear and they get caught up in tactics, but you know what? If you don't have the mind to employ those, nothing's going to happen. You're going to crumble under the pressure. I saw this a lot of times at the fight. I even found my mindset wavering at times in certain situations. Your mind gets overwhelmed by everything, and you have to, if you haven't cultivated this in yourself, you will crumble under the pressure. You will start thinking too much. You will hesitate in different methods of employing your violence on that situation, or whatever strategy you need to employ. You won't move correctly. You won't get your gun into the fight. You won't get into the fight in general. You'll freeze. A lot of people say that, the two reactions are fight or flight. No, it's actually fight, flight, or freeze. And freeze is one of the most common things you see. I would say more so than fighting or flight. Freeze is very, very common. And if your mind is not in the fight, you're not going to be in the fight. And Musashi talks about basically your state of mind and strategy should not be any different than your ordinary state of mind. And this is basically walking as a warrior for all your days. When you get up, the mindset you have for a fight is the same one that you have for tying your shoes. And this is not getting emotional in the fight. A lot of guys, and I will admit, when I used to fight, man, this was a strategy I employed a lot of times. If you could agitate or get your opponent riled up and get their mind off, that was the way that they could be defeated. There's a lot of fighters who've fallen into this. We saw this in MMA. We saw it with Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo. McGregor got under his skin because that's what McGregor does. And McGregor's using strategy there. He's just talking shit. No, he's using strategy, and he's using it effectively. Nate Diaz, these guys do the same thing. Different manners, of course. But you could do the same thing. You see a lot of guys getting emotional in a fight. And I warn people about that. One of the training things that I used to do for my brothers is I would do, especially, I do it in combatives training as well with any students I work with, is I have something that I call berserker training. And basically what it is I have them and I'm sitting there with them throughout this whole thing. I'm kind of playing the voice of the devil. I'm not going to say the voice of God. I'm playing the voice of the devil behind them. And I put all this horrible shit in their head. As they're standing there, I'm telling them to calm down, relax and everything. And then I start talking about horrible shit. I'm like, you just walked in the house and there's this guy that's in front of you. He's got your newborn baby, and he's strangling it right now. He's trying to kill that baby. What are you gonna do? And I do that, and on the trigger of what are you gonna do, they attack the dummy. And I'll have them just go completely apeshit on this dummy for a good 5 to 10 seconds. Then I'll have them back off. And I'll look at them, I'll say, relax, calm down, let it go away, and I'll let it all die down, and I watch them to see how quickly they can bring themselves back to a normal state. I want them to go to violence and bring it back. But I don't want them to react emotionally. And that's a difficult concept to really put forth here on a podcast episode where I'm using words to describe what happens. But this berserker training is vital, and I've seen some people just get completely riled up. I'm like, hey, this guy right here, you walked in your house, and he's just killed your wife, and he's heading to your kid's room now. What are you going to do? So I do all these different things, or I'll say, think of the worst thing that could possibly happen to you right now. Think of the worst thing that could happen to someone you love. This guy in front of you just did it. This motherfucker in front of you just did it. He's doing it. He enjoyed it. He's sitting at the trial right now, and he's laughing. What are you going to do? So I'll throw these things at them, man, and just unleash that berserker. But I also want them to calm it down immediately after I call halt. Okay? And that's the vital aspect of it. Because if they could immediately bring it down and their breathing comes back down, and I don't see any signs of distress, I don't see any shaking, that lets me know they are not attacking that target emotionally. They are attacking it with the same mindset that they walk around with daily. I demonstrate this to some of my students, and they would just be like, wow, holy shit. I mean, you look like an animal, and then you just completely go calm. And, maybe that's a little bit of psychosis on my part, but hey, it is what it is, right? As a barbarian, having that barbarian mindset, you do not want to have this completely emotional response to all these horrible things. And the same thing goes with strategy. When you start reacting emotionally to the things that are happening in front of you, your opponent can begin to lead you because they can use those emotions against you. So you have to be very almost stoic in your way of strategy. Keep that mindset locked on and focused on the target. As I've talked about before, you enter a problem-solving mode. We got problems to solve, and we're going to solve it. And the same thing goes for any sort of combat, whether it's a gunfight or not. If you keep your mind in the fight, you're going to come out a lot better than just freezing or fleeing in terror. If you flee in terror, yes, you may live, but you'll have to live as a coward the rest of your life. Musashi talks about also posture and strategy. Regarding posture, he says, regarding posture, it is appropriate to keep the face neither lowered nor raised, nor leaning nor frowning, to keep the eyes unperturbed, the forehead without wrinkles, but with creases between the brows, not to move the eyeballs and not to blink, though keeping the eyelids slightly lowered. In this way, you shape a beautiful, luminous face, keeping the nose straight and the lower jaw straight, protruding. You think to yourself, why is he talking about face and how you should stand? And this whole part here talks about how you should stand in the fight. Your posture says a lot to the person you are fighting. And when I say fight, we could even be talking the preliminary aspects of the fight. Maybe they're sizing you up. Maybe the bad guy who's thinking about robbing you is looking at you, and he's looking at your face, and he's looking at the way you carry yourself, and he's like, man, I don't know. This guy looks like he might know some shit. I'm going to go after this other person over here who's got their head down in their phone, and they're kind of shuffling their feet along, and they're wearing skinny jeans and a pink shirt. Maybe that's the person they'll go for. Because bad guys are going to look for the easy target. Predators do it in the wild. What do? They look for the weakest target. They separate the weak from the strong. And that's the same thing. Your posture says a lot. Most of communication that we have is not verbal. It's nonverbal. It's the way that you carry yourself and the way that the way you look, the way you lock eyes with people. It's the way that you stick your chest out when you're walking. All these different things make a difference. Are you walking fast? Are you walking slow? Do you have the scent of prey on you? All these things come into play. You cannot tell me that you can't go somewhere. I do this a lot. Me and my daughter used to do this a lot. We would go out. We would go to the mall. I would take her to the mall. We would go to the food court. We would just sit. We'd go order some food. We'd sit there. And the two of us, as a father-daughter experience, would people watch. And we would discuss what we see with people. We would say, look at this guy over here. Of course, some of it would be, a little bit of joking around. Look at this fucking guy over here. And I don't mind cursing in front of my daughter. She's going to grow up to curse anyway. This is a cursing household. Cursing people tend to be much more honest, so that's why we like to have a cursing household here. We would say, look at this guy, look at the way he's carrying himself. Or we would see a guy walking around with in cold weather, in warm weather, with not a long sleeve shirt, but he would have basically like a vest on, and then this other thing, and he would obviously be he's wearing this as a cover garment. That's one of the reasons I'm not a big fan of what you would call cover garments, because typically cover garments stand out. They stand out really bad. So you can start to get a reading of this person. You look at the way a person carries himself and get their mindset, get their idea. Are they predator? Are they prey? That's the first thing you can figure out. You can see how they interact with other people. In the book Left of Bang, which I really want to get the authors of that book on here, because that is a phenomenal book. They talk about combat profiling that was used, and it's basically the ability to pick out anomalies in a crowd. When you have this ability to examine people's posture, when you have this ability to examine the way that they operate, the way they move throughout other groups of people, you can start to get a read on, do they stand out? Is there something that's not quite right about this person? If you watch any violent instances that take place, whether it be a robbery, a home invasion, a bombing, terrorist attack, if you watch the footage, you can see immediately. No one has to tell you that's the bad guy coming there. You can read that body language, and it's very, very important to do that. It's important to do that for the people who may be causing you violence, but it's also important to do that for yourself, so you have the ability to project that towards other people. The way of looking in strategy that he talks about here, he says, your look must be broad and ample. Looking and seeing are two different things. Look powerfully, see gently. It is necessary to look at what is distant as something that is close, and what is close as something that is distant. This is essential in strategy. It is a fundamental strategy to know the sword of the adversary without ever looking at it. You must exercise well in this, whether it is a matter of strategy on the individual scale or strategy on the large scale. The way of looking is the same. It is essential to look to both eyes without moving your eyes. But without preparation, you will not be able to achieve this way of looking at the time of combat. So I talk to guys about this in combatives as well. I talk about studying the opponent when you're in this stage of the pre-fight. What are their eyes doing? Are their eyes, are they locking at you eye to eye? Where are they staring at? I tell guys, once you start to observe the eyes of other people, you can really kind of start to grasp their intentions. My wife used to laugh at me because we would be walking someplace together, and I would look at her and I would say, that guy there was checking you out. She's like, what? How in the world do you know that? I said, because I look people in the face. And a lot of times people's eyes will deceive or will tell on themselves. Some people will try to deceive you with their eyes, but ideally, if you pay attention to the eyes, pay attention to the face, pay attention to the body structure, you can start to read that opponent. What are they going to do? Where are their eyes going? For my wife, it tends to be her boobs. That's where their eyes tend to go. So a lot of times what happens is I'll be looking at them in the face, and they'll be staring, and then they look up and see me looking at them in the face. Then they're like, oh shit, bring their eyes down and walk away. And it's like, yeah, that's right, I got you, pal. So a lot of guys will do that. And it's important when you're looking. You see Musashi talk about he says to look powerfully but see gently. Look at something that is distant as if it's far away. Look at something far away as if it's close to you. So I think I said that completely backwards there. That's my dyslexia kicking in. Look powerfully, see gently. It is necessary to look at what is distant as something that is close, and what is close as something distant. There we go. Damn you, dyslexia. So, what does this mean? This is using your peripheral. I talk to guys about this in combatives as well. I say, when you're looking at your opponent, don't completely get fixated on their eyes. Although I just said you can look at the eyes to read your opponent, but do not become fixated there. You need to have a peripheral view of your opponent. A lot of times I tell guys to kind of look towards the upper chest area. And the reason being is when you do this, you can get a full view of the entire person. You can see what they're going to do. Any movement they make, especially, I tell them this in boxing. This is something I picked up from boxing. You want to stare at the eyes. When I find somebody that wants to stare at my eyes, what do? I look down at their body, and then I punch them in the face. So if they become completely fixated on my eyes, I can use that to deceive them. For us, what we want to do is we want to stare at the upper chest area, because any movement they make, it's going to tell on them. Whether they're reaching for a gun, you can see their arm move. So as soon as their arm goes to move, your eyes can shift down to the hands. Where are their hands going? So this becomes vital, not to get fixated on the eyes. Don't play this eye game. Some guys can use their eyes to stare you right in the face the whole time as they're drawing a weapon. That's probably a good idea in a lot of aspects. So don't get fixated on the eyes. Let your peripheral view observe the entire body. The next part is the way of gripping the sword. So Musashi talks about gripping the sword here. And this is one thing that I will not get completely focused on here. I'm going to move past this a little bit, but I just want to say this. A lot of guys get focused, especially in firearms training. In firearms training, they'll get into grips and all these different things like this, and what's the correct grip and everything. There are better grips. The correct grip is the one that you can hit the target with. There are better grips. There are grips that will help you control recoil better. There are grips that will help you do, move from target to target better. There's better ways to do things, but ideally, too many people get focused on grip, stance, and all these different things like this. Even in the world of archery, I find this as well. They're like, oh, you shouldn't hold the bow too tight. You should let it sit in your hand loosely, and don't grip the string this way. Don't go too deep. And it completely goes past the point of getting the arrow to hit the target. A lot of people get too caught up in the tactics, and they forget about the mindset. The way of moving the feet. Musashi gets into how you're going to move and how you're going to walk, and this goes right back into stances and everything again. Typically, the way you're standing is the way you're going to fight. So, just take a step, start walking, and stop. If you're listening to this and you got the ability, you're moving around, start walking, stop. Where your feet are, that's where you're going to fight from. So, it's a very simple. Musashi always said he focused on not so much of dynamic movements and hopping around and everything. He practiced walking in his way of strategy. And I think that's vital because it instills a sense of balance. It instills a sense of movement. You're not taking big plodding steps. You're not walking like you're stomping bugs. You're not moving like you're speed walking in a speed walking competition. You have the ability to make just very calm, deliberate steps. And wherever you stop, guess what? That's where you're fighting. It may be with your right leg forward, maybe with your left leg forward. You may be in a horse stance. You may be sideways. Who knows? You may be on a hill. Who knows? But whatever, learn to employ your craft and learn to fight from whatever position you stop in, because that's what's going to happen. You need to learn to fight sideways, forward, backwards, angles. All these things become important. Musashi talks about this next part, the 5 guard positions. I'm not going to get into that because he's talking about primarily blade work, and I don't want this to be a blade work video. So he's talking a little bit about technical forms and everything like that, teaching the guard without a guard, and all these things like that. He does talk about a single cadence for striking your adversary here, and I think this is important. It says, here's what I call a single cadence strike. You are near your opponent at a distance apart at which you can just reach each other, and you strike very rapidly, directly, without moving your body, not letting your will to attack become attached anywhere, seizing the instant when he does not expect it. You strike him with a single blow just at an instant when he is not even thinking of pulling back his sword or moving it out of the guard position or attacking. This becomes, I look at this as drawing your handgun and making those vital critical shots. The single cadence strike. The single cadence strike, even though he's talking about aspects of sword, I want you to think about this from a firearm standpoint. I tell people, it's been told to me by different people. James Yeager talked about this at the class. I've spoken to him about this as well on a couple other instances. But the single cadence strike, the first, when you go to the range, if you can't go someplace where you can draw and shoot, and you have to go to the square range and everything, I advise people to pay the most attention to the very first shot they make of the day. The very first shot you make out of your gun throughout your training session, or I would say your practice session, I want to use the correct terminology, because shooting at the range is practice, not training. The very first shot you make is the most important shot. Why? Because when you have to use your gun in a situation, that's how you're going to be shooting. You're not warmed up. You're not practicing. You're shooting completely cold bore. One shot has to be the shot that you want to make. So that first shot you make is important. This is the single cadence strike. Can you get your gun into play and make that headshot? Active shooters are a big thing right now. Active shooters, terrorist attacks. A lot of people, it's very easy to get body armor. So can you make that critical shot at 15, 25, 30 yards? Can you make those critical shots? Can you make those headshots? Then you take it one step further. We move one step further and we say, what about drawing from the holster and making that critical shot? Can you do that? That is your single cadence strike. So the next time you're out doing any practice with your handgun, think about that critical shot. Even if you can't draw, hold your gun at a low ready, bring it up, boom, make your shot. It needs to be fast, but it needs to be accurate as well. Remember, it does not matter how fast you miss. I tell this to my archery students all the time. I do not care how fast you miss. So, can you get that gun up, make that single cadence strike? That is the most important. It needs to be effortless. It needs to be smooth. It needs to be non-telegraphed if possible. You need to be focused on your sights. You need to be able to put those rounds where they go. This is vital. This is important. And you need to work on this the next time you're practicing with your handgun. So I think that single cadence strike is very important in your handgun practice. So definitely practice that. Another part here, he talks a little bit about some different strikes and different ways of using the sword. But he talks about this part here I think is important. Conduct against many adversaries. And of course he's talking about drawing your swords and everything like that. But he says here, distinguish clearly in the conduct of your opponents. I'm sorry, let me read that again. Distinguish clearly in the conduct of your opponents the order in which they are launching their attacks. You face first those who come at you first. Look all around, strike at the same time in opposite direction with your right sword and your left sword in response to the tactics of your adversaries. It is bad to wait after having struck. Immediately resume your guard position on the two sides, and as soon as someone advances, strike him forcibly. Extending this momentum, assault those who advance each time with intention of making them crumble. Continually make every effort to push your opponents back so they will be forced into one rank, one behind the other, like fish strung on a line. This is another important concept, especially when it comes to combatives. I talk about this a lot with multiple opponents. Anybody who does any multiple opponent work, you will see this idea. And this is another thing, where did I learn this from? This is something I learned from Aikido. A lot of people, like I said, I've talked about this like crazy. I've even talked about this with Mr. Keating. But a lot of people getting this idea of Aikido, it's bullshit art. Aikido has a lot of strategy in it, and I think they excel in the art of strategy against multiple opponents because they teach you not to stay in this fatal funnel, in this dead man's land, which is between these bad guys. Bad guys like to circle. Look at a pack of animals. That's what they'll do. They will circle you, and then they will attack. That is what bad guys like to do as well. Look at any video of mob attacks, and this is what happens. They don't all stand behind each other and wait their turn. They all get around you and start beating you down. And in Aikido, we are taught to get out of this middle of the circle that they create. And a lot of times that will involve different strategies, of course. But in the group dynamic, you typically have one person who tends to be the alpha of the group. The same as any sort of pack. You have the alphas and you have their dogs around them. So you got the alpha, and he's typically the one who's doing all the jawing. You motherfucker, we're going to beat the shit out of you. You don't want that. He's the one that's going to be talking the shit. That's the guy you pop first. He's the one you go towards. And that's going to be your way out of the hole. That's the guy you put down. Okay? Sometimes the alpha will break. A lot of times there'll be a couple other people who will want to get involved. If you pop them too, bring them down, the rest of them a lot of times will scatter from what I've seen. However, if you find yourself up against multiple opponents who are willing to keep fighting, ideally the more you move and get around them and put bodies in a line. One of the things my old instructor used to talk about with Jackie Chan, he said Jackie Chan always had in his movies the best strategy for fighting multiple opponents. And I'm like, what are you talking about? He said, because Jackie Chan runs. He said, if you watch Jackie Chan, he'll run, then he'll turn around to fight. When people run after you, typically they run in a line. It's weird. I've seen this happen. If you watch videos of guys chasing each other, I guess maybe because one dude's always faster. I don't know. But a lot of times guys will run in a line. So Jackie Chan would run and all these guys would be chasing him in a line. He'd turn around, fight a guy, and then run away. So everybody keeps chasing him in a line. So he never had to really fight multiple people surrounding him. He would always make them line up. In strategy of fighting multiple opponents, you always want to get out of that middle sector where they want to crowd you and start lining them up. And when you start lining them up, it puts them in the way of each other. Plus, if everybody is lined up and you can keep a body in between you, You only have to fight one person at a time. Think about that for a minute. Think about that from a strategic standpoint. If you've got 3 people that are trying to get around you, you attack one, get behind him, or maybe you just use something that I use this in the fight. In the fight at Tactical Response, you're probably going to hear me reference this throughout many podcasts in the future because a lot of things we'll learn. In the fight, I found myself a lot of times actually there were multiple people. There was always multiple people I had to deal with. So a lot of times if I didn't need to get my gun into play, I could use an arm drag and put a body in between us. If they were trying to surround me, I arm drag a guy, get behind him, and all of a sudden he's now become my shield. And if I have to fight anybody, it's him. He may even be my hostage until I get out of the situation. Because I do believe in certain situations, to avoid further violence, a hostage may actually be the best method for doing so. So anybody that's listening to that is probably like, oh my God, if they just walked in there like, what? He's talking about taking hostages. Put it in context, man. So when you start to line your opponents up, you can get them on a line that prevents you from having to fight everybody at one time. Aikido was good about if you had to throw a dude, you throw him into another person, throw him in the path of the other person. That disrupts the rhythm. There's that cadence again. It's disrupting their cadence. So all these things can start coming into play. You can start using these in strategy for whatever, because like I said, in most situations you're going to find yourself in, it's going to be more than one person you're going to have to fight. So I think this is a vital aspect of Musashi's strategy. This is something he obviously ran into throughout many of his duels, throughout many of his battles that he was in. So the next scroll is the Scroll of Fire, where he talks about, this is basically, it says, I write about battle and combat in this Scroll of Fire, for it is through the image of fire that I think of battle and the strategy of the School of Two Swords. So the first part he talks about here is regarding the... Okay, guys, that is going to do it for the first part on our series on the Book of Five Rings. We've covered a couple of the scrolls already. Stay tuned for our next episode that will cover the rest of this book, which is really the meat of this book when we get into the Book of the Fire and the Book of the Heavens and everything. It's going to be some really interesting stuff, and you'll start to see how all this begins to tie together into strategy that we can employ in our daily lives. So remember to check out the website, thebarbarianlounge.com. Also, thebarbarianlounge.podbean.com. Subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher as well. If you have not become a patron to support the Barbarian Lounge, please do so. We're getting ready to start offering some exclusive content on that site that you can only get if you are a patron. You also get access to the podcast episodes early, ahead of everyone else. So if you just can't wait, that's a great way to do it there. Plus, each and every subscription supports the show. You can be a patron for just $1 per episode. That's all it takes right now, and you get access to exclusive content, and you're helping to support the Barbarian Lounge to help us keep doing this and bringing you these great, phenomenal shows and amazing guests. So thank you guys. Tune in next week for the second part of the series when we break down even further the Book of Five Rings. But for now, fellow barbarians, the lounge is closed.